John Tierman, who is a professor at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And he was very deeply troubled when, through the Lancet magazine and a study he had been part of, he learned that the number of Iraqis, forgive me for moving between wars, but he learned that the number of Iraqis estimated to have been killed while Iraq was under United States occupation, meaning after the 2003 bombing, was over 600,000. And John Tierman thought, when this statistic gets released, the US public will be up in arms. People are not going to stand for the notion that 600,000 people would be killed while the US is in charge over there. And much to his amazement and chagrin, there wasn't a ripple in US public opinion. It was considered to be sort of a snoozer, I suppose. And so John Tierman, not one to shirk a research problem, started trying to understand how can it be that the US public wouldn't respond to a figure he found so staggering. And what he came up with, I'm boiling it down quite a bit, but in a book called The Deaths of Others, Tierman concluded that if you can convince the US public that a war is essentially a humanitarian war, it sounds like quite an oxymoron, doesn't it? Then you will kind of get from the US public at least a level of indifference. Now, I think I could express some of this to you by thinking of my mother. My mom had quite a blend of Irish charm, mother wit, and Fox News. And if she'd heard it on Fox News, it must be true. Well, when Kathy Green and I returned from Iraq after being there during the shock and awe bombing and just beginning to see what was coming in terms of internecine warfare and civil war and chaos and breakout, I was distraught. And I went to my mother's bedside, and she wanted to comfort me. And so she said, "Kathy, dear, what you don't understand is that the people of Iraq could have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein a long time ago. And they ought to have done so, and they didn't. And so we went in there and did it for them, and they ought to be grateful, and they're not." Case closed. Never mind that I and my friends had been there many, many times, that we lived there through the shock and awe bombing. My mother had heard it on Fox News that the United States had essentially done a humanitarian thing. We went in there and got rid of Saddam Hussein, and they ought to be grateful, and they're not. And don't we hear in today's New York Times something a bit similar? The New York Times chiding the Afghan people for not being more grateful because of all that the United States military presence has done to guarantee better rights for women. It's just not true. Under the Karzai governance, laws that the Taliban couldn't even force into becoming legislative realities have been put into practice that are hideous in terms of women's rights, forcing women to submit to their husbands' demands, and otherwise they can risk being put out of the homes or denied food, saying that women are clearly second-class citizens in the workplace. Horrific laws, and this is while the United States has been propping up the Karzai government, and during the time that the United States has been the occupying power, the average lifespan of an Afghan woman has gone from 44.6 years to 42.2 years. Afghanistan is still the worst place in the world in which a mother can give birth to a child. And imagine my friends Shahira and Nekba and Bibi Sadi, who tried, because they're kind, to laugh when I suggested that the United States military forces, some in my country believe, are there to protect their rights. They laughed instead of cried. And they said, "Kathy, don't you ever let anybody tell you this." But the New York Times said so. And so we live in a time when we are very, very vulnerable to outright lies being used to support war after war after war. And of course, our job, our responsibility is to try to continue to present the truth to people and to do it through various different forms. And so I'd like to ask Kathy Breen to come forward. She, and I know many of you, join in appreciation for Dan Berrigan. And Dan Berrigan dedicated the poem Kathy is about to read to the plowshares 8, people who deeply believe when shall come the day, O Lord, when they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift the sword against nation, neither shall they continue to learn the ways of war any longer. And this poem is entitled Sun. Thanks.
This poem, Dan Berrigan wrote to the plowshares 8 with love. Some stood up once and sat down. Some walked a mile and walked away. Some stood up twice, then sat down. It's too much, they cried. Some walked 2 miles, then walked away. I've had it, they cried. Some stood and stood and stood. They were taken for fools. They were taken for being taken in. Some walked and walked and walked. They walked the earth. They walked the waters. They walked the air. Why do you stand, they were asked, and why do you walk? Because of the children, they said, and because of the heart, and because of the bread. Because the cause is the heart's beat, and the children born, and the risen bread. Thank you.